Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to our program today. It's entitled Flesh on Dry Bones. I decided to do this program, and I've been entertaining the thought for a while. If you know me personally, you know I have stories, and you know I tell these stories to anybody who listen about my ancestors. And I get comments all the time. They say, "Oh, that's so cool. How did you find that out? I wish I could find that stuff like that out about my ancestors. My ancestors are so boring." No, your ancestors are not boring. Yes, you can find out those kinds of things about your ancestors. Trust me, we all have, I like to say, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the every variation of that. So without going any further, I'm going to share my screen here with you. And I'm going to start, there we go, from the current slide. We're going to try to make those dead ancestors come to life. And hopefully you'll walk away from this video today having some ideas how to go about doing that. I divide ancestors into 4 types when I'm trying to put flesh on the dry bones. There's the famous, and we're not going to touch them today. We all have them in our tree. We just don't think we do. But the famous can be people who came over on the Mayflower. Some of the early colonists would qualify as famous. Presidents definitely are famous. Entertainers, musicians, that kind of thing. Then we have regionally or locally well-known, or what I call popular people. These are your state government people, your local government folks, maybe the editor of your paper, maybe somebody who ran a business, those kinds of things. We all have notorious people as well. They're the fun ones. You can really find out a lot of things about them. And then there are ordinary people, and ordinary people are probably the most exhausting because you really have to dig. They weren't criminals. They weren't famous. They just went on about living their life. They were salt of the earth kind of people. You can find things out about them too. It's a little harder, and it's really hard if you're looking for women, especially in the 1800s. I think by the time we get to about 1960 or so, it gets a little easier to find information about women, probably. But prior to that, it's not that easy. And there are ways to build a story for a woman that existed during that time frame, and I'll show you that. Okay, I use for sources, my main source is newspaper articles. You have to kind of watch newspapers. They tend to be a little, what do I want to call it? A little bit sensational at times, but that's where you get some information, and you can research what they tell you and decide if they are sensational or if it is kind of accurate. Local histories and genealogies. A lot of times local folks will publish a book that has a little biography of everybody in it. That's kind of like a who's who kind of thing. That's what I'm talking about. You can get also some published genealogies on your family that are kind of more of a local nature. Locally, we have the family files of E.E. Barton, and he wrote down a wide variety of details about families. That would fall into this category, I think. Court records, particularly depositions. Those are so fun. They call in the whole neighborhood and depose everybody, and it's pretty easy to see, who likes who and who doesn't like who, and it goes on from there. Military records are really good. And in the last few years, Civil War records are much easier to come by. Some of your other wars are a little harder, but they are on fold 3, and you will find some interesting things, be able to track your ancestors pretty good there. Pension records particularly are really interesting as far as putting flesh on dry bones for ancestors. I use directories, not necessarily to put flesh on dry bones, but to help me find those ancestors in those non-census years. So, like in 1865, there was no census on a national level. So you might find a person in 1865 living somewhere that they never appear on a census schedule. So that's good, because what you have to do, you have to have good genealogy in place before you can ever begin to really put flesh and on dry bones. I say that because I'm going to give you an example coming up. We're going to visit my third grade uncle, J.M. Lowe. And there was another J.M. Lowe that appeared in some of the same papers that my J.M. Lowe did. I needed to tell the difference between the two men. I needed to know which was which. And so good genealogy will help you put your person in the right place at the right time, and also know a little bit about them, like their occupation, especially. That's important. Maps, if you're researching people who fought in battles, battle maps are good. I've used Google Maps just because when I found out where a person lived, I was curious as to whether that house was still standing. So I've tried to find it on Google Maps. You can do that. I found two ancestors who lived in what's now part of the UK campus at the University of Kentucky. For those not in Kentucky watching this, I'm sorry, I used a little local lingo there. I was a student there, and I walked by their houses, not knowing that my ancestors lived there. Of course, they've been absorbed by the university, and the houses are no longer the land has been absorbed. It's no longer standing, but I still walked by where the house used to be every day for 4 years, having no clue. So I find a little humor in that. Letters written to or from or sent, written to your ancestor or by your ancestor. They'll oftentimes keep you up to date on current events. It was important to them, or they wouldn't be telling it in a letter. Writings, other writings that your ancestor did, diaries, maybe just writing down stories that they are, or something a story about something they remembered. Those are important. They don't necessarily have to be published. They can be, but they don't necessarily have to be. They could be passed down to the family. Published books also. So if those diaries are published and they've been sold, like at Amazon or whatever, and you can readily buy them. They're not just published and passed out to the family, is what I'm saying. You may find something there. And don't think that your ancestor did not appear in a published book. Chances are good they may have. You just never know. So give it a try. Stories. They don't necessarily have to be written, and they don't necessarily have to be passed down by your family. They can be oral traditions. They can be other families' oral traditions that included your family in them. Okay. Or even just included the community, because that will give you an idea of not just where your ancestor lived, but how they lived. Okay. History. Especially when I have people who fought in wars, I like to go back and look at history. Who was where and what were they doing and what was going on at the time that my ancestor was living here or doing this or involved in something else. And I'm sure that there are other records out there that can help. You never know what you're going to find when you get into it. Whoops, that was not what I intended to do. So we are going to start with J.M. Lowe, as I said earlier. He was more regionally known. I found a lot about him in newspapers and local histories. Those were the two things I looked at the most in building flesh on his dry bones. I also looked at history in general. Published books. He wrote a book. He wrote a couple books. One I call more writings. It was just some memories that he had and a speech that he included, a little genealogy thrown in, and he published it and distributed it to family. It's since been picked up. It's available on Internet Archive for free if you want to read it. It's called An Idle Hour in Life's Pilgrimage. If your ancestors were from Cowansville in Pendleton County, he does talk about Cowansville and different people in Cowansville and describes the place. So that even if your ancestor is not one that he talks about, he does talk about how they lived there. So that does help you get some flesh on dry bones there for your ancestors, not just him. J.M. Lowe. He was president and one of the founding members of the National Old Trails Road Association. It's a mouthful. And he wrote a book basically on its history. And that's floating around out there and can be purchased. And his stories, as I said, when I was talking about writings, that his stories were a source that you could use to put flesh on other people's dry bones, not just his. So we're going to go to J.M. Lowe. Let me switch over. I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing the correct screen for you, and I wasn't. So there we are. Joseph Macaulay Lowe was born at Collinsville in 1844. He went off to join the, as so many young men did, the cavalry during the Civil War. He fought in the Confederate Army. There is no record for him. It doesn't exist. It didn't exist in the 1800s. But there's a neat story there about it. These, I'm just going to scroll down here and show you on the right side over here where all the ends are. Those are newspaper clippings that I found about him. And I'll just show you how many there were. Okay, because as I said, he was locally or regionally well known. And there we go. So anyway, probably one of the first things after I got out of records, as far as, census records and marriage records and that kind of thing. Once I started actually doing some other research, I ran across this. A couple of different published biographies of him. They were published in those, like I said, those little books where they write a little biography about everybody in the neighborhood. And I used this to outline. It told me when he went to Greenfield, Indiana and became a teacher. It tells me when he passed the bar. Told me when he went to Kansas City, when he became the prosecuting attorney. So I got some dates and got some time frame there. And this is the other article that I used. They both told me when he, this was in Kansas City, Missouri, its history and its people, 1808 to 1908. So that was another one. And then this one, I'm not really sure where this one came from. Someone else posted it on Ancestry, and I just clipped it from them. So those were things that I used that to kind of build out on the left side of this, the different years like 1863, 4, 5. I'm clipping along trying to find something that's going to put him in the Confederate Army. And eventually other than his stories, I didn't find anything until I found, and there's a good lesson to be learned in this. I posted the link in my web links down here. This Shannon is after Lowe trying to block confirmation of appointment. And it was appointment to be a director of the Confederate home in Missouri, which is where J.M. Lowe moved after he left Greenfield, Indiana. Shannon had been looking for his Civil War record and didn't find it, and he questioned whether J.M. Lowe actually served. J.M. Lowe then contacted his old captain, Tom Moore, who was back in Kentucky, to write a letter on his behalf, and he did just that. And the letter is published in this article here. What it was on InfoWeb, and I did not download the article, did not snip it, and it's not there anymore. So I've got to contact the Kansas City library, and hopefully they will have the newspaper this was in. I don't even know what newspaper it was in because that's not in the web title. So I'm going to be digging for that one because that is the only proof I have that he actually served, other than his own word. There is an interesting little story that came out of this. And if I can find it really quickly, I will share it. I also will point out that I do save battle flags for everybody who served. Especially in the Civil War, I have the Trans-Mississippi flag. I have the Kentucky Confederate flag. I have the Bonnie Blue flag. And I do that because I can put those people in a region. So when I go to research my ancestors in that region, I've always had this obsession with, did they ever meet each other on the battlefield? So if I know that they fought in a certain region, I can kind of start looking to see if that ever happened. And I've got them all grouped together. It makes it easy to find the people I'm looking for to have fought on the battlefield. And yes, I have found some that were on the same battlefield. Not necessarily did they see each other, but they were there. Don't find the article right off the top of my head. This looks all like, I think it should have been on the first page. But anyway, it was one of these, published genealogies that had it had been published, and he told the story that he had once carried a dispatch from Richmond, Virginia to the Cumberland Gap. It was written on tissue paper, and he carried it in the index finger of his glove. So I thought that was kind of a really cool story. He would have been, well, let's see, he would have joined in 1862 because that's when the company was formed in Cowansville. So he'd have been about 17, 18 years old at the time. So that was a pretty hefty assignment for a kid that age, right? Well, another really cool thing I found out about him was that he brought salmon to Missouri, and that was in a newspaper article down here. It told how many salmon he brought in and what creeks he put them in. And I don't know I never did find anything that said how it went. But I don't think they said fish for salmon in Missouri. Maybe they do, but I've not heard of that. The death of his brother also was a place that I found where he had come back. J.M. Lowe had come back to Kentucky. He brought his brother Francis Marion's body back to Winchester, and he stopped in Greenfield, Indiana, and the paper there wrote just a little few lines about him being there and that he was originally from there and had been there, not really originally from there, but had been there and lived there before. And he also wrote, as I think I've mentioned, the Idle Hour and Life's Pilgrimage. That book is available online at the Internet Archive. You can also buy it at Amazon. He just wrote down, basically, he spent an idle hour writing some memories that he had of growing up in Cowansville. He did a brief genealogy, and he included a speech that he had given. So his writings helped build flesh on his parents' dry bones for me, his grandmother as well. He talked about a brother, John Watson Lowe. He talked about other people in the community, Peggy Draper, who was one of his mother's best friends. He talked about her. He talked about Tom Moore. And he talked about just, what it was like growing up in Cowansville, which is really of interest to anybody who has family there. Let me see. It must have been on my third page. I have so much about him. Here we are. Moses and Nancy Lowe. They were his parents. And reading this, not only do we learn about his parents, but we also learn about him. His writing style indicates, he's a little sentimental, and he held his parents in high regard. I was 13 years of age when father died on the 31st day of October, 1857. As I remember him, he was of medium size, compactly built, square-shouldered, and straight as an Indian. He was a quiet, self-poised gentleman, universally esteemed by everyone. I do not remember ever to have heard one cross word between him and my mother. I never saw him in ill humor but once, and that was when, he goes on to explain. And then he talks about his mother and her sweet, clear, ringing voice singing down all the years that have gone those grand old songs, how firm a foundation, White Pilgrim, and one, the name of which I never knew and never heard anyone else sing it, but fragments of which still linger in my memory, though in no connected form. And then he talks about coming back to Kentucky and visiting her in 1895 when she was 89 years of age. So you kind of, not only do you get a feeling for them, you get a picture of him as well. So the brother that he talked about was John Watson Lowe. John Watson Lowe died at the age of 21 in the Confederate Army. And I just think these are so sad because these young boys went off to fight and they didn't come home. And they were young. They had no family, no children. They were not married. And that happened. There were several out in Callensville that story applies to. And since this is my third grade uncle, I thought, it's really unfortunate that there's nothing about him that anybody will ever remember or talk about, because everybody who knew him is long gone. There are no stories about him passed down that I'm aware of. He lived such a short life. So around the time he was about 20, I think his date of birth for me is kind of an estimate based on census records. He joined the military, the Confederate Army, in July, and he mustered in on the 22nd of July in Boone County. I first found him in the military in the Orphan Brigade, which is an infantry regiment. He was in Company A, which was formed in Falmouth. So, but in that record, I discovered that he had transferred from Vaughn's brigade, Corbin's men. So I went looking for a record for Corbin's men. It was a little bit, the record was there. It was not very complete. There wasn't much to it. And it caused more questions than it gave answers. It's the short story there. So I did find Marion Corbin had a memorial on Find a Grave, and it kind of shed a little bit of light. It says Marion Corbin was a first lieutenant in the Confederate Army, and while on a recruiting mission was captured by the Union Army. He gave his oath to the United States and posted a $3,000 bond, but was sentenced to be shot anyway at Johnson's Island by order of General Burnside. And then he talks about family legends, says that Marion Corbin was pardoned, came home, and was murdered by Union sympathizers and is buried in Owen County. The guy did confirm that legend on down here in a newspaper clipping that he's included in the memorial. So I thought, okay, so they all got captured. And digging back, I found out that John Watson Lowe, yes, Marion Corbin and the officers did go to Johnson Island. The men were sent to Camp Morton in Indiana. That would have been, well, they were captured at Mount Sterling a week after he mustered in. So that's not a good sign, is it? So he was sent to, on July 29th, he was sent to Indiana. On the 22nd of November, he was sent to Vicksburg in Mississippi, and with the intent of being paroled. It's kind of interesting. This little boy from Callensville. He's 20 years old. He's probably not been very far from home at all. Maybe he went to Covington on the train. They had family in Owen County, so he maybe had been over there. He probably went to Grant and Harrison because Callensville's kind of in close proximity to those counties. And that's probably about as far as he ever went. And now he's been to Indiana and he's been to Vicksburg. I don't know if he was transported there by train or if he went down the Mississippi. It would be interesting to know because he would see different scenery, so he's seeing the world at this point. When they got paroled, some of the men joined back up with Colonel Jesse, and they were in Owen County. Eventually, Marion Corbin made his way back to them, and his group was reformed. I don't know that John made it to Colonel Jesse's. I put this in here to just remind me I need to do some digging. There is a gap in his record, and that's the problem I have. But I do know that on September 20th, 1863, he was wounded at Chickamauga, and he would eventually die from that wound on November the 4th. I knew that I had other relatives who had been to Chickamauga, fighting at Chickamauga. So I thought, wonder if they were ever on the same battlefield. And I started writing a story. I called it Too Young to Die. And I started putting into words what I knew about John Watson Lowe. So I talk about Corbin's men and I go on down. I was able to find, so here I found, died in the hospital in Ringgold, Georgia on November 4, 1863, of wound received in Battle Chickamauga. I doubt that he ever got paid. He had been promoted in August before the battle to sergeant. And I'm just not really sure that he had ever been paid when he died. So he was about 22 when he died. And then I was able to find battle maps. Okay. So I could place him in reserves on the 19th. I knew about where he had been on the 20th, and I can narrow him down to actually getting into action after 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 20th. And he was would have been killed between that time, or been shot between that time and dark. The other person was with from the county that I knew was there, was with an Ohio regiment, and he would have been fighting up here where John Watson Lowe would have been down here. So I doubt that they ever ran into each other on the battlefield, but I tried to find out. Let's see, I'm going to skip over. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to do that one. Let me get out of this for you. This is James Samuel Asbury, known as Sam. He also died in the Confederate Army. He was in the cavalry, probably died of disease. Doesn't really say. He left a small child behind, about 14 months old. The interesting thing about him was he died in a hospital. It was Emory and Henry College, had been converted to a hospital for the South during the Civil War, and it's still a college today. So it still exists. The men who died there are buried at the college. They do not have graves. There is one stone that has everybody's name on it that's buried there that they know of. Sam's name is not there. His is interesting because when I get into his court case, this is what I'm looking for. When he died, Tom Moore was his captain, and Tom Moore went into court in Washington County, Virginia, which is Abingdon, and probated his estate. I have never seen another Civil War soldier who died in action or died in the war have his estate probated in the county where he died. This is the first time I've seen it. And he does, Tom Moore does get appointed the executor, and he goes through and lists all the expenses. That's a return of marriage. That's not what I'm looking for. But he does give the expenses and of the estate. And he does say that one of the expenses he claims is for, this is it, rail passage to ship his body back home. When E.E. Barton talked to his sister, she said he died in the South and was buried in the South. Okay, so we have a mystery. Did he get home or not? She also had another brother who died in the South and probably was buried in the South. He died in Tennessee, McMinnville. And so did she get them mixed up? What happened? Did he make it back home? We've not found a grave for him, and that's not uncommon. If he's buried back here, it's on a farm somewhere probably. I contacted the Emory and Henry College. He's not on their list. They have a Daniel Asbury in Company D, 4th Kentucky Cavalry. Well, there's no Daniel Asbury in Company D, 4th Kentucky Cavalry. So is that a mistake? Was Daniel Asbury in another regiment and they've got the company wrong and regiment wrong? Or is that Samuel with the wrong name? We don't know. It's, again, more questions than answers, but it makes a good story, right? Then, of course, Tom Moore, as I mentioned, was their captain. And to put flesh on his dry bones, I looked at his pension record. I also found him in a published work. We're going to look, the pension record describes a wound he got, and the wound was in, I believe it was his left arm. And I don't know why that paper is not coming up here. We're going to refresh that. Oh, there we go. And his pension application, and I think it's going to be like over this way, where they describe the wound that he received. It shattered the bone in his arm, and it never really healed right. Tom Moore appears in George Dallas Mossgrove's book, The Cavaliers in Dixie. Mossgrove was in the 4th Kentucky Cavalry. He was not in Company D, but he did write about Tom Moore. And he said that when he was shot in the arm, he put his arm in a sling and continued on in the battle. The arm wound up being 2 inches shorter than the other arm. And so he had to deal with that wound the rest of his life. See if I can find the Mossgrove clipping here. And I may have put that, let me get back here to the page. He is one of the people I did track down his house. He lived on Maxwell Street in Lexington. And Good Sam owns the property, it looks like today. 130, he was at 146, and 130 was the only number I could get to come up on this side of the street. But as you can see, this is all Good Sam here. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's one of those places I walked by many times and had no clue. Yeah, I'm going to have to go back down there and walk by. May have been in the Mossgrove book, I believe. I do have quite a few newspaper clippings, but that's mostly where his regiment was fighting, because I was tracking them as they went throughout the war. Absalom Dickens' diary. If you have people who were in the 4th Kentucky Cavalry, he was as well. Was from Campbell County. His diary is available on the Kentucky Historical Society's webpage, and he talks about where they were and what they were doing. He talks about them going down in caves to chase out bushwhackers. So it's an interesting read, even if you're just a Civil War buff, or if you had someone who was in this 4th Kentucky, or even the Orphan Brigade Company A from Falmouth, because the two camped together, so they were on a lot of maneuvers together. So it does give you some sight. Let's see where I had the Mossgrove one, but okay, we'll just skip on through that. But again, the George Dallas Mossgrove book was called Cavaliers in Dixie, and he talks about how calm Tom Moore was. He said in battle it was the same as if he were sitting around the campfire talking, that he was just that calm. So that helps put that flesh on dry bones. He was wounded also at Mossy Creek, and I've not looked into the Battle of Mossy Creek, but I could find out, when he was there and when they were called into the battle, and maybe kind of, determine where he was on the battlefield when he was shot in his arm. So that's another option for you. And he's one of those people you would not have thought would have shown up in a published book, because he was pretty much just an ordinary person. maybe a little bit locally famous. He had been the county clerk in Pendleton County prior to the Civil War. After the Civil War, he went to Bourbon County, where he was a dry goods dealer, and then he moved to Fayette County as he got older and lived with his daughter and son-in-law. So the next one is another ordinary person, an ordinary woman. This is my great-grand aunt, Louisa Jane Carr. She shows up on census records. She has a marriage record. She has a son, and she dies. Okay. There's not a whole lot about her. However, there is. If you look at the dates, her parents, she was born in 1867. Her mother died in 1882. She has all of these siblings. Marion was probably dead by the time their mother died. He only lived to be about 7, and nobody knows when he was born or when he died. But she would have had a sister, Evie. Aunt Evie was what they always called her. She was born in 1879, and her mother dies in 1882. So she's maybe 3, getting close. Another John Wilson Carr would have been 4 years older than Evie, so 6, 7, something like that. There are young children there. She's one of the older ones. Delia was born in 1865. She was the oldest, and James was born in 1869. So she's the second. James was the oldest boy. Another fascinating thing is that their father was blinded in a farming accident, and it was blinded him in one eye. He later lost the other eye to glaucoma. My general assumption is that when D. Carr died, he was already blind in at least one eye, because this picture of him, he looks blind. It's pretty obvious. So just think of what the extra work there on the kids would have been to take care of the girls. You know, she and Delia were probably taking care of the rest of the kids in the house and cooking. So you can kind of see the hardships there. She doesn't marry until she's 27 years old, and that's probably because she's still raising a little sister. I did find in the Carr papers in the Barton file and in the Asbury papers, so this is a time when somebody else's genealogy tells you about your own family, I found where Louisa Jane, or Louisa Jane probably is how it was pronounced because they called her Lou, was a teacher. So she taught. This was in an interview with Cheney Asbury, the daughter of Bob Asbury. And it says Cheney went to school at Orange Grove. And now Orange Grove School was on her dad's and mother's property, and her dad was a trustee of the Orange Grove School. So Barton asked her who were her teachers. One of them was Miss Lou Carr, daughter of Henry Carr. Lou and at that time would have lived on the Roanoke Church Road. So, and then the Carr papers, it refers to her as walking to school to teach. And that would have been more than a mile each way every day. So, you do what you have to do, right? She, then after she married, I am able to track through a tragedy. Her son, Clarence Gaw, it's G-A-W pronunciation, so Gaw, was in World War I, and he died in the flu epidemic, and that's what my little symbol there means. He left Grant County, and I picked him up in 1914 in Lexington at 532 Rose Street, and he was listed here as in 1914 as a waiter. By 1916, he is a student living in the same address. His parents, however, don't show up in those directories in Lexington, so they came later. He married in 1917, and his wife was from Murray. My guess is she was also a student at the University of Kentucky. Enlisted in the military, and then he died. When he dies, his parents wind up with his house, and they are living in Lexington. Let me see, in 1910, they're in Grant County, and by 1919, they are living in Lexington at 532 Rose. Their son is already dead, and that's the first time I find them in the directory in Lexington. Her husband, she lost her son in 1918. Her husband died in 1919. So she lost them. They were actually 14 months apart. The son in the flu. Her husband was from an ongoing illness. So she ends up being alone in 1919. Another thing that I found interesting was that the history of Fayette County in the World War. This was available online at the Lexington Public Library. You do not have to have a library card to view it. And let's see, I'll download it for you and show you. The city of Lexington decided to erect trees on the campus of the University of Kentucky in honor of the fallen war veterans there. And this was from the Council of Defense paperwork, which was about her son. And I have attached this to her file, and I get more information on her son. But this dedication of the trees took place in, and you probably didn't see that, I'm sorry, and I've already done it. But anyways, from the Council of Defense, the dedication of trees was in April, and then of 1919, and her husband died in December of 1919. So you see that. I was also able to go again to Google Maps and was able to find 532 Rose Street. And it's right here across from the old chemistry physics building where I had chemistry. Next to it is the Rose Street Garage. And if you are familiar at all with the UK, this was where Donovan Hall was. They've recently torn it down. And then Hagen Hall behind it. Willie T is over here now for perspective if you're looking at it. But yeah, on Rose Street, I walk by it every single day. I lived in Donovan Hall, and then I lived out at the complex as well. So for 4 years, I walked past that and had no clue that there once was a house there that some of my ancestors lived in. I thought that was kind of neat. So we're able to kind of paint a life of tragedy for her just by looking at these records, looking at her mother's death, looking at the age of her siblings at the time her mother died, her father's blindness, her son's premature death, and then losing her husband shortly after losing her son. The interesting thing about her is, and her death record, I'm going to show you the image on this one because I think you need to, it's probably good to see it. Her cause of death was exhaustion from acute melancholia. Underlying cause, arteriosclerosis. So she basically died of depression, is what they're saying, exhausted from being depressed. The family story was that Aunt Lou was never right, the family's word, right, after her son died, and that she suffered from depression from that point on, understandably. And that also puts flesh on those dry bones for you. I'm going to do another really quick one. This one involves a letter. This is my third great grandfather, James F. Jenkins. He was born in Campbell County. He lived in Pendleton until the Civil War broke out. Family tradition says that he recruited for Tom Moore and recruited a company of men to join the Confederate Army at Callinsville. He swore them in at Highfield's store. That is confirmable in a court case. Okay. So again, court cases. I love court cases. They pressed a horse into the service of the Confederate Army, and that's why there was a court case. He wrote a letter home. After the war ended, he did not come back to Kentucky. The family story was he feared retaliation for deeds done and drastic measures taken, which was what was the hook for me to get interested in the Civil War and to be interested in genealogy. I had to know, what did you do that was so bad you couldn't come home? So it was the horse. It turned out to be that he ordered the men to press the horse, and there was a court case over it. So he settled in Claiborne County, and he wrote a letter home to his son, who fought in the Union Army. And it just says, "Dear son, I take my pen in hand to let you know that we." Let me see. I'll read it from this. To let you know how well this letter is in common health. So it was really hard. Yeah, I have no clue what he's talking about. Hoping this will find you in good health. I got home all safe and found all well. Give my best love and respects to the brethren and sisters at Gum Lick, and tell them that I hope we will meet in heaven if we never meet no more on earth. Then it says, Matthew, I want you to come and see me next fall. Tell Brother Wells I want him to come with you. I finished planting corn a week ago. Wheat looks well. Some oats looks well. Here times is hard. Let me write soon. I want to hear from you. All good. Bye for this time. Elder J. Jenkins to son Matthew. So that was his letter. This was written in 1892. That was one of the years that he made a trip back to Kentucky, according to family legend. And this kind of supports that because, he says, I made it back home okay. And he talks about, times were hard and these are the crops I'm raising. So you kind of put some flesh on dry bones there because you're able to confirm some of the family story. And you're also able to see, that he's farming and he's the corn looks good and the wheat looks good. It's going to be a good year, maybe. So that was a letter that we could use to kind of substantiate a family story and to use it to put some flesh on dry bones. Okay. That's going to be it for our program today. I hope you got some good ideas of places to go to look for records. We all have people, you just have to look. I will also add that other than James Jenkins, I didn't have a grandparent that could be famous, infamous, or ordinary that I was able to put that much flesh on their bones until I get back to my Mayflower people. So look at those cousins and those uncles and aunts and try to build some stories there for your family. It's a great way, I think, to get people interested in your genealogy is through the stories of your family. I'm hoping that works for mine. So, and I think it will. And I hope it works for yours. If we can help you in any way, let us know here at the library. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.